This video is sponsored by World Anvil. D&D prep is a really strange topic to discuss because, quite frankly, there are a bunch of ways to do it, but you're almost never going to see how somebody else preps for their games. And the prep we do see often just comes in the form of published adventures, and that's both daunting and misleading. It's very common for new game masters to think, well, if my notes for my homebrew campaign don't look like a published adventure, then I'm doing it wrong. But I promise you, you're not. This is the most important lesson of this video, so I'm going to open with it. There is no right way to prep for D&D. Now, there is a lot of great advice out there, and so there are a lot of wonderful techniques you can steal. And that's what I've done. I've stolen techniques from the game masters out there who have shared their processes, and I've synthesized them into my own routine, which you'll get to see today. I'm going to walk you through my process of preparing for my game sessions, and then you can hopefully see some things that you think are cool and that you'd like to steal for your own games. But some of what I do might not be right for you, and that's okay, that's cool. Watch how I do it, take the pieces you think are going to be useful, and discard the rest. That's what we're all doing when it comes to D&D prep. We're stealing whatever we can to run the best possible games for our players. This video topic was voted on by my patrons and YouTube members. I've been posting polls to vote on video topics to add to my schedule, and this was one of the winners. And if you want to vote on upcoming videos, you can do so by joining my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member at $15 a month or more. I've got a new poll up there right now for June's bonus video, so join now if you want to have a say in what I'm going to talk about on this channel. Now, one of the reasons we don't have a standardized format for session notes is because we don't all share the same needs when we're running our games. That's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be telling you about my needs as a game master when I'm behind the screen, and you'll be able to see what things I do to address those needs. But the other reason there's no standardized method is because we hardly ever see any other GM's session notes. It's very rare that a D&D session ends and the GM will be willing to just hand over their entire notes for that day so the players can see what they had up their sleeve. For one thing, we don't always want our players to know what we had prepared and what we had to make up on the spot. We don't show players our notes for the same reason so many GMs use a GM screen.
It helps maintain the illusion.
But also, how often in any session do your players do exactly what you expect them to? How often do they get stuck on the first room or go off on a random tangent and leave you with a bunch of prep for materials they haven't gotten to yet? Well, a lot of the time, that content is still potentially going to be useful in the future, so you don't want to tell your players, hey, here's what I thought you were going to do, because they still might do it. So yeah, we don't tend to see our GM's notes. And that's actually kind of a bummer, because I think if more players saw their GM's notes, they would realize how little information you actually need to run a great game. Or they might start thinking about what might be more helpful to them personally if they ran a game. And then, just maybe, more people would run their own games. Because as it stands right now, when we want to see prep for a D&D game, we usually have to buy a D&D adventure. And that's a problem, because if we base our prep on what we see in these books, we're never going to run the game. I've seen this all the time. A ton of people who want to run games assume that their notes have to look as intricate as an officially published module, especially if they're the type of people who want to create their own adventures for their campaigns. The only adventure notes they can reference are published adventures and campaign books, and trying to replicate that format is an extremely daunting task. Thankfully, it's also totally unnecessary. I touched on this in my video about the differences between pre-published adventures versus homebrew adventures, but a published adventure has to account for every possible choice the writers can think of. Anything the players might reasonably be expected to try is ideally factored in somehow so the GM has the information they need. So of course they have to put a lot of effort into the presentation of this material. But that's not something you have to worry about. You only have to put enough detail into your notes to prepare it to run it for like 3 to 6 people. Adventure writers also have to offer enough material to satisfy thousands of game masters. But you only need to add enough detail to prepare for what you want to do, and how you like to play and run your games. Now thankfully these days there are some examples of GM notes online. Not a lot, but if you know where to look, you can find them. And we can see how other GMs prepare for their games, steal the stuff we like, and toss out the stuff we don't want to use. For example, Sly Flourish frequently live streams his campaign prep, and he's written whole books about the simple steps you should take to prep your games. So if you haven't checked his stuff out, go do so. He's got a lot of thoughts on the subject. I don't tend to use his 8 steps for every session as often as I used to, but I will dip into them sometimes when I need to add a little juice to my own process. And I think the 8 steps are invaluable for you to check out if you're trying to figure out how you want to prep your games. There are also examples of some GMs just uploading their notes for you to check out. Matt Mercer has very occasionally uploaded his notes after a session of Critical Role, usually when there are no spoilers for upcoming sessions. For example, during Campaign 2, he uploaded the notes for a Harvest Festival session and the notes for a Dungeon Crawl episode. So we can compare his notes to the game sessions and see what stayed the same and what changed. The links to those files are in the doobly-doo. The Dropbox links went inactive years ago, but they were archived by some fans and some fan sites. Speaking of sharing GM notes, Matt Colville has done the same thing a couple of times. 3 times during the early days of his channel, he used to upload his notes and then stream his games, so you could watch the game with his notes in front of you and see what he was doing. And then after all 3 of those sessions, he did a live stream after each one to discuss how it went and answer questions. And that can be really useful as well, to see where he felt he hadn't prepared enough and see how he felt about the game session. And even outside of that format, he's made 2 videos about prepping for his games. One was about prepping a pre-written adventure, and the other was preparing for an adventure that you write yourself. Again, those links are in the doobly-doo below. As a matter of fact, the first time I can remember ever seeing another GM's notes, it was thanks to the internet. Chris Perkins, the senior story designer at Wizards of the Coast, the guy who basically decides what adventures to publish, used to run a blog called The Dungeon Master Experience, which was hosted on the Wizards of the Coast website. Sadly, after many website updates, those blogs are not supported anymore, though I'm very lucky that I printed out a whole bunch of them. They're in a binder in my garage. I also found a link to them on the Internet Archive. I'll share that link below because I think those blogs are an incredible resource. But in his blog, at least once, he posted a copy of his own GM notes as a link in one of his posts. Sadly, I'm sure the link to his notes is a dead link by now. But later in this video, I'll describe what I stole from Chris Perkins' notes, which was how he introduced his characters. The only other aspect of his notes that I remember was that he would type up a recap of what had happened in the last session, previously in Iomandra, to read aloud at the top of the next game. But that's not something that I do in my games. Again, I took the parts of his format that I liked, but I was only able to do that because he had shared his notes on the World Wide Web. And hopefully this video can do the same thing for you. I'm going to share a copy of my notes for one of my game sessions, and I'll walk you through some of the choices that I make. That way you can see what I think about when I'm prepping, and rip off the things that you think would make the most sense for your games. You'll be able to see my notes on screen, but there's also a link in the description below, so you can download these notes and follow along yourself. Now, I actually live streamed the process of prepping for this game, and I actually might make a habit of that. I really enjoyed prepping my game with folks watching along. I honestly have a really bad habit of postponing my campaign prep until the last minute, so live streaming the process was actually super useful because it made me more likely to actually, do it. We'll talk more about that later in this video. So if you want to see me prep for my games and ask questions about my prep, then check out the live videos archived or follow me on Twitch. I'm trying to stream on both platforms more often. In this video, I'm going to be prepping for my Curse of Strahd campaign. Most of the video is pretty spoiler light. There is going to be a point where I reference a spoiler from the book, one that I think you should just cut, so not the end of the world if you listen to that part. But if you want to avoid it, there'll be a time code on screen. I use Google Docs for my notes. As soon as I said that on the live stream, some folks were scandalized. But to be honest, my notes are incredibly simple. I don't need anything fancy. This is a pre-written campaign. I'm running Curse of Strahd, and I'm running the game in Foundry, so a lot of the prep work is being handled automatically or in another application. And I'll do another video some other time about the way I run Curse of Strahd, as well as a video about running a game in Foundry. Of course, the new agreement between Wizards of the Coast and Foundry just changed a bunch of my game's settings, so if you follow me live, you'll be able to watch me try to troubleshoot my way through these issues. So, again, if that sounds fun for you, check out the streams. But for now, we're going to assume that I'm prepping for a normal game session. So the first thing I do is make a new notes doc, and then I name the game session. Now, this is something that most GMs don't do, but it is something that, again, I stole from Chris Perkins. Now, I don't know if he named his sessions in his home game. I don't know if his old notes included a session name or not. But he would come up with session names when he ran his own actual play episodes. When he ran live games of Acquisitions Incorporated, the sessions would have names like The Last Will and Testament of Jim Dark Magic, or The Lost Episode, which really confused me for a while until I realized that this episode hadn't been lost. It included references to the TV show Lost.
Je m'appelle Daniel. Appartient le Château Rousseau.
But where I really noticed the potential positive effects of naming your sessions actually came from his streamed actual play series, Dice Camera Action. At the beginning of each session, they'd play an intro theme, and then we'd see a title come up. And I haven't watched those episodes in quite some time, but I feel like there were a few times where the players would hear the title and say something like, "Wait, what does that mean?" Or, "Oh god, that doesn't sound good." So for the past couple of years, I've made an effort to name my game sessions in advance of the session. In fact, if I'm short on time and I can only prep one thing, then this is it. Because this is how I open game sessions. I personally like the idea that game sessions have names, and what I used to do as a player or a GM was just come up with a session title after the fact that I could use for my own notes. But that title might not mean anything to anybody else. But if I can name the session in advance, then at least I can unify the experience so everybody is using the same title if they decide to refer to the session by its name, even if it's just in their own notes. Because, as I've said before, I'm kind of a control freak. In this case, I named the session The Crossroads, because they were going to meet up with some elves at a crossroads west of Vallaki, but they were also going to try to figure out what to do next, so they were going to be at a metaphorical crossroads in this session. Now, I'd have to ask my players how they feel about having named sessions in advance, but here's how I hope they feel. I would hope that hearing a session name helps give them confidence to know that I've got a plan for the session, and that there's some promise of a story beat they can expect to hit today. I would hope it makes them excited about the game session, and promises some fun possibilities of what I might have up my sleeve. I hope they think the session names are cool, though I know that that is extremely subjective, but I work really hard on them. And sometimes I know for a fact that I get the reaction I'm hoping for, especially when the title is working on a number of levels. I've consistently been naming the sessions in my other Curse of Strahd game, the one I've been running for the past few years, and some of those titles have managed to draw some really excellent reactions because they were ominous or had multiple meanings. For example, when the characters first entered Barovia, the session was titled, Hope You Survive the Experience. That's a reference to an old X-Men comic book cover. Welcome to the X-Men, Kitty Pryde. Hope you survive the experience. So, in my head, there's the unspoken welcome to Barovia ahead of that. But if my players didn't get the reference, which most of them did not, then it was still just creepy. There was also Run of the Mill, which opened right after the battle at the windmill, which I was particularly proud of that title. When the players had a dinner party with Strahd, that episode was called The Devil's Communion. In the next session, they were still at the castle, and Strahd invited them to dance with him, so that one was called Dance with the Devil. When they were trying and failing to escape from the Amber Temple, Trapped in Amber. It's honestly something that I spend a lot of time on when I'm prepping for my games, but considering it's also how I open every session by giving them the session title, I think it's pretty important in helping set the appropriate tone. I basically view it as the title card rolling to let the players know, okay, it's time to stop talking about life and pop culture and whatever we've been talking about, now we're settling into the game. Oh, also my favorite title wasn't scary at all. It was a joke. But the timing is what made it work so well. This was back in 2021, but for some reason, just before the game, the players had gotten onto the subject of The Rise of Skywalker and how disappointing that movie was. But then, when they said, okay, let's play, Mike, what is the session called? I got to respond by saying, well, when we left off, you were about to cast Speak with Dead on your fallen ally. So I'm not kidding, the title of the session is The Dead Speak. I don't think I've ever seen my Warlock player laugh as hard as he did when he heard that title drop. I'm also very glad that they were already talking about Rise of Skywalker before they heard the reference, so that my joke didn't derail them into a tangent about it, because that is definitely a risk when you include a pop culture reference in your session title. Or, in the case of the obscure X-Men reference, your players just might not get it, and that might not send the signal that you were trying to communicate. Next in my notes, we've got a list of the characters. The format of this list is very similar to how Chris Perkins formats the names in his notes. In fact, normally it's even closer. Normally I also include the players' names. I don't have those visible here because I don't imagine that my players would love having their names visible online, but there's also a lot of details that I didn't include because they don't apply to my game. For example, our Curse of Strahd characters are all teenagers from our world who got pulled into Barovia, like the old D&D cartoon or Narnia, so they don't have D&D races and backgrounds, at least not in the fiction of the game. They have close equivalents and mechanically they have those things, but it's not anything that I need to worry about in my notes. But when I'm running a more traditional game of D&D, I'll include their race and their class and their background. You can adjust this content to include what's most important. For example, in my Shadowdark game, I include the players' alignments and class titles. This section is also useful to include absent and former player characters in their own categories beneath this. Again, that's lifted from how Perkins formats his notes, at least how he used to in the blogs from a decade ago. And it's been working well for me all this time. Then we've got the NPCs who are traveling with the party. That's maybe not clear in these notes because again, they're really just for me, but I find that in the campaigns where we run through officially published Wizards of the Coast adventures, especially Curse of Strahd, the party winds up picking up a lot of companion characters. In my other Strahd game, the players have 4 companions traveling with them, and they're on their way to go rescue a 5th in the next session. So here at the top of my notes, I include the NPCs who are traveling with the group, including any pets or familiars. That's not something I did until this campaign. I never worried about the NPCs, but that was a lesson hard learned after those previous campaigns. I've gotta find a way to put them right at the top of my notes, otherwise I'm gonna lose track of them, especially during online play. For in-person games, I could keep track of these companion NPCs by creating initiative tents for them so they'd always be on the GM screen along with the party, but that's not as easily done for a virtual game. Next, you can see my note to remind myself to reread the sections of Curse of Strahd and Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft about how to generate creepy horror atmosphere and vibes at the game table. I keep forgetting to do that, so clearly that note is not doing its job. I guess there's still room for improvement in this system. Then we get a section that I literally only just started doing in the last few sessions of this campaign, which is writing down all the NPCs in the area that I expect them to go to next. In this case, I had a strong feeling that the party was going to go to Krezk, so I read through the chapter and wrote down the relevant NPCs. Real quick, I'm going to talk about some Curse of Strahd spoilers, jump to this time code to avoid them. Now, there really are not that many NPCs in Krezk outside of the Abbey, and my characters won't be able to enter the Abbey yet. As written in the adventure, they can't enter Krezk until they do a fetch quest elsewhere, but narratively, my characters need someplace they can consider safe and put their stuff down, and Krezk is quite frankly the closest place they're going to find to that. So I moved the fetch quest so we'll instead get them access to the Abbey, which is optional. They don't have to go to the Abbey, but they are curious about it, and they're also already curious about the Wizard of Wine's winery, so I don't need to force them to go there. I think they're already going to want to go there. In fact, my players made a discovery that I think is going to send them to the winery next. If you want to know more about that, watch the live streams. I'm also going to make a video about this campaign someday when it's all done, but suffice it to say, it'll be like hitting 2 or maybe even 3 birds with one stone to tie the winery into the Abbey. But for right now, they can't go into the Abbey, which is where most of the NPCs in Krezk are located. In fact, in my campaign, I've moved Vasily Van Holtz and Rahadin to Krezk because, first of all, there needs to be something else going on in Krezk, otherwise this town is just so boring. Second, I think Vasily is in Vallaki in the book, or at least that's where he appears most often, if I remember correctly, but there was just way too much going on in Vallaki, and I wanted to spread the plot out a little bit. And third of all, I wanted Krezk to be a viable place to leave Irina and Ismark. In the book, Irina just gets a happy ending, and no agency, as soon as they get her to Krezk, and I just think that ending for her character sucks. In my game, Krezk is still the best place to leave her because it's safe and far from Castle Ravenloft, and the monsters nearby aren't that powerful, but that resolution for her character just had to go. So as you can see from my notes, there are very few NPCs in Krezk outside of the Abbey. In fact, I actually should have come up with more. I should have come up with a tavern keeper because I had to invent one in the middle of the game because I realized there's nothing like that in the Krezk chapter, at least not that I could find as I was in the middle of the session and they entered the tavern and I was flipping through the pages. I wish I'd noticed that when I'd been prepping. That would have been nice. But also, Past Mike didn't even write down the name of the Burgomaster's kid who had gone missing. Again, that's a deviation from the book. In the book, the Burgomaster's child has been taken by illness, but aside from just adding to the despair of the town, I don't really know what that adds to the campaign. Like, there's not much the players can do with that. It kind of leaves them with nothing to interact with in the town. So instead, I had the child stolen by the werewolves, which is something that the werewolves already do, and they make their lair really close to Krezk, so it just works better dramatically. Because as you can tell, that's where I put my emphasis when I'm GMing. What do I think my players will respond well to at this point? What do they need to provoke them to run around the map some more? Next in my notes, we've got the time that the session begins in the world of the game. In this case, we open at the beginning of the 6th day that the party has been in Barovia, just as they're finishing their long rest, so really early in the morning. This helps me keep track of how time is passing in the world of the game, which is enormously valuable. I'm also tracking how close we are to a full moon, which might be important in a campaign with werewolves in it. Unfortunately, I didn't think it through, so I scheduled it so it's very unlikely another full moon will occur naturally before the campaign concludes. But as somebody pointed out in the live stream, there are always supernatural forces that can change the phases of the moon with a wave of their hand. But it is so valuable to track time in your campaigns. Not only so you can know whether or not the players you're about to infect with lycanthropy will be cursed to transform into monsters under the light of Princess Yue, but also so you can track how long until the big festival in Vallaki, which I do need to add back into my notes in case the players go back through town. You can also track your bad guys' actions and plots, so if somebody is making a move against your players or their favorite NPCs, you can know how long it'll be until that happens. And you know what? You can track any and all timelines you want by using today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is more than just a place where you can create articles for your players to keep track of the lore of your world. It's also a fantastic place to track timelines, thanks to their Chronicles feature. You can upload a map to the site and then add points of interest and connect those to timelines. You can also keep those timelines separate, so the actions of your players don't necessarily change the upcoming events in other timelines if you don't want them to. And if you're using something else, like Google Sheets, that would be a lot harder to do. Things get really wonky in other platforms. But World Anvil is designed to make the experience as as seamless as possible. You can also link articles to the timeline. So if you want to add an article for, say, the upcoming Festival of the Blazing Sun, you can link it to the upcoming date in your World Anvil page. And World Anvil is offering an amazing discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK, you could save 51% off of any annual membership. That's more than half off. That is an amazing deal. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout. Thanks so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. The next part of my notes is what I spend the most time on outside of the session title, but I find that they're pretty much linked. I write down what I expect to happen in each session of the game. For example, in the first hour of this session, I knew that the players wanted to flee Vallaki and meet up with a group of elves at the crossroads just west of town. They would also meet the Taxman, a vampire NPC that I've added to the adventure. I've been trying to figure out how and when to introduce him, and this seemed like the perfect place and time. I didn't actually decide what he would be doing until the session itself, but I trusted myself to figure that out based on what was going to be the most dramatic possible thing to happen during the session. Then in the second hour of the game, I expected them to probably go to Krezk, and then they might meet the Burgomaster in his house and try and fail to get into the Abbey. Because of the way the scene played out, the Burgomaster actually wound up meeting them in the tavern. I felt that made the most sense when we were actually running the game. And they learned they couldn't get access to the Abbey from other people in the tavern because the players were asking the townsfolk a lot of questions about the place. So that still kind of played out close enough to what I expected. And in the third and final hour of the game, I guessed that they might meet Vasily Van Holtz, and he would reveal to them that he had a Union flag from our world, and that his father was a British soldier who had been pulled into Barovia. This is a story beat that I was really excited to hit for a lot of reasons, so I wound up nudging them toward it in a few ways, but it seemed like it wound up really landing with the players, so I don't have any regrets. Again, I will talk about those specifics another day. But why do I do this? After all, we all know that our players are never going to stick to the plan. And they shouldn't have to. After all, this is their game. I put my thumb on the scale to get them in front of Vasily because I thought it would be a great way to end the session. But if they wanted to go do something else instead, it's not my job to steer them back to Vasily. It's my job to find the best way to execute their plans, not make them commit to mine. So why make a note of what I expect and or hope to happen? Well, this was a lesson I learned when I used to run an actual play podcast. Now, I was a player for a long time in that game, and I'm really proud of that first campaign. But when I took over the reins for Campaign 2, I tried to experiment with the format, and I really goofed it up. This is something that I can and probably will make a whole other video about, but to simplify it for today's topic, I was trying to adapt the structure of something like Critical Role, where episodes are 4 hours long and players are fully self-directed to go wherever they want and do whatever they want. And I was trying to transplant that onto the format of an hour-long podcast without really changing it. And it just didn't work. Because when you break a 4-hour session of meandering into 4-hour-long episodes, you realize the player spent a lot of time not doing anything. And you had episodes where nothing interesting happened. So after listening back to some particularly lackluster episodes, I basically sat myself down and said, okay, I can't let nothing happen in this game for long stretches of time. I have to keep the pace moving. I'm going to make a plan for what I expect will happen in every hour of the game. That way, even if the players surprise me and go wildly off the rails, I can still make that my guiding star. Make sure things are happening in each session. Make sure things are happening in each hour so we can break that into an episode. Keep the pressure on and don't let the game feel meandering. Now, the events of March 2020 wound up killing that campaign anyway, which I think was kind of a mercy kill, but I still carried that lesson with me. And even though I'm not running an actual play show right now, the lesson still works well for my styles of games, at least when I'm running a highly narrative 5e campaign, like I do when I run Curse of Strahd. Like, this isn't something I do for my Shadowdark games, but for 5e, this definitely works better with my style. Now, most of the time, my players don't stick with what I'd prepped for each hour of the game, and neither do I. This session was one of the rare times where it played out more or less as I expected. The Krezk and Vasily scenes definitely happened back to back. They were not an hour apart. The events at the crossroads took a lot longer, but I still had this goal. Make sure interesting things are happening within each hour. Keep the session moving and keep it dynamic. Now, that doesn't always mean non-stop plot or non-stop action. Even a quiet scene can work. Hell, the scene with the elves was entirely exposition until the Taxman showed up, and then it was really tense, and then once he left, it was basically all exposition with the elves again. But my goal was just to make sure that the game didn't languish, because if they have their way, most D&D players will try to be as safe and careful as possible, which can often make the game boring, and it's my job to keep things tense. But I also don't want things to feel hopeless. I want my players to feel like they're getting things done, which is another reason I try to make sure important things are happening in each session, and especially more than one important thing is happening, so that helps to break it down hour by hour. Now, rounding out my notes, we have my random encounters for Barovia and my death chart. Now, I'm currently testing out this approach to random encounters, but I'll make a whole other video about this at some point in the future, once I've had some more time to iterate on this process and this style. For now, you can see what I'm using in my games, but this is very much an alpha test for the system that I have in my head. As for the death chart, well, in my Curse of Strahd games, whenever a character dies, they have a chance to make a deal with a powerful entity on the other side. If they take the deal, they can come back to life right away, but they'll get some sort of transformation. This list is collected from a bunch of different resources, but some of those are available for purchase on the DM's Guild, so I didn't want to republish my entire list here in this PDF because that would really not be fair to those independent publishers. Again, this is something that I'll talk more about in a future Curse of Strahd video, but I'm going to try to track down the links I use as reference for this death chart and put them in the description for this video. Looking at my notes, you can probably see a theme emerging. I put most of my emphasis on the narrative. I really don't worry about prepping encounters here. Although again, if Founder keeps having issues, that might have to change. It will also change once I return to in-person play, because my approach to encounters is totally different when the monster's attacks and health are not being handled by an app or a website. I will also have to have a lot more control over what I have in front of me. When I'm running an online game, I can pull up any book I own or any Google Sheet I've used, or pull up files on my laptop, or just Google new images and drop them into the Discord when I need a quick reference image. I've got so many resources available, and my players have no idea which ones I had at the ready and which ones I had to come up with on the spot. But that's going to be totally different when I get back to playing at the table, and I'm going to need to change how much time I put into my prep, and specifically where I spend my time and energy when I'm not using the same resources as I use in a digital game. I expect my prep process is also going to change, just thanks to the fact that I'm currently live streaming it. Too often my prep happens last minute, but by deliberately carving out more time for my prep, I think it's going to give me a chance to reassess my process a little bit. So maybe you'll get another video down the road about how my notes have evolved as the preparation process changes thanks to all these different shifting circumstances. But now I gotta ask, what about you? What do you include in your prep notes? What are you going to steal from mine or from the other notes that I've linked in the doobly-doo below? What apps and systems do you use to prep? Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, you know what to do, right? Yeah, you know. You don't need to like the video and subscribe to the channel and ring the bell and leave a comment, because you know that all of that stuff helps the video find more people. If you want to support the channel financially, you know how that works, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you do. You know that you can become a YouTube member or a Patreon member. Supporting at any dollar amount helps a whole lot. If you want to hang out with other amazing people and be part of a fantastic community, you know where to go, right? Yeah, that's right, you do. You go check out my Discord channel. We've got an awesome group there. It's really wonderful. And if you want to stay up to date with my latest news, you know what to sign up for, right? That's right, I've got a newsletter. So if I send out updates, which I hopefully have done recently and will probably keep doing soon, then you can be in the loop on all of that, and all those links are in the doobly-doo below. Click here to check out my recent video about tracking initiative. That video was a ton of fun, and I think it's going to give you some really helpful resources for running your game. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.